Ethan Hale thought he was about to live his lifelong dream of traveling through South America with his daughter and her husband, but one message shattered everything. They told him he was not welcome on the trip, even though he had paid for their villa and funded their lifestyle for years. Heartbroken and betrayed, Ethan soon discovered they were enjoying the journey with Victor's parents instead, all while spending his money. What began as quiet disappointment turned into a plan for justice as Ethan sold their home, moved every possession into storage, and left them stunned when they returned. A courtroom battle followed, but the law was on his side, and in the end, Ethan found freedom and companionship with a loyal new partner. This story is filled with betrayal suspense and a powerful twist that will leave you speechless. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Now, let's dive into the story from the very beginning. Ethan Hale had always been a man who kept his promises, especially those he made to himself. In his early years as an architect, long before the weight of family obligations and endless bills had drained his time and energy, he had carried a dream inside him like a secret flame. He wanted to travel the world not through glossy pages of magazines or television programs, but with his own eyes, sketchbook in hand, recording each scene as if he were both witness and artist. Of all the destinations he longed to visit, one had remained fixed in his mind since his 20s: Machu Picchu at sunrise, a place where history and mystery converged in the mist of the Andes. Now, at 67, the dream felt within reach. His daughter Clara had agreed to join him on a luxury train journey through South America, a trip that would weave through mountain ranges, ancient ruins, and vibrant cities. Her husband Victor had shown polite enthusiasm when Ethan first suggested it, though Ethan suspected Victor's real passion was more about luxury dining and first-class carriages than cultural wonders. Still, Ethan was grateful. The thought of experiencing it together, of finally standing with Clara on the mountain he had longed to see, filled him with an almost childlike excitement. In the days before departure, Ethan threw himself into preparations with the precision of the planner he had always been. His suitcase lay open on the bed in his quiet home, each item carefully chosen and folded. A stack of travel maps sat on the dresser corners, worn from weeks of studying routes and noting down small side trips worth taking. Next to them, his beloved leather journal rested its blank pages, calling to him ready to be filled with sketches and reflection. On the cover was a faint mark from a coffee spill years earlier, a reminder of how long it had waited for this moment. He checked and rechecked his passport, the tickets he had booked months in advance, and the schedule he had printed out on crisp white paper. There were guided tours, museum visits, and free days he had left open, deliberately hoping to wander local streets and discover places the guidebooks overlooked. The weather forecast promised mild days and cool nights, perfect for long walks and evening conversations over a glass of Malbec. Ethan's anticipation grew heavier each day, pressing on his chest in a mixture of joy and nervous energy. He hummed softly to himself as he packed a habit he had when trying to calm his mind. He thought of the moment he would step off the train, sketchbook under his arm, Clara by his side. He pictured her smile, the same smile she had as a little girl when he taught her how to ride a bike, or when he carried her on his shoulders through crowded summer fairs. The thought warmed him in a way little else did anymore. On the evening before departure, Ethan dressed in a casual shirt and sat by the window with a glass of water, staring out at the fading light. He imagined the train windows filled with rolling landscapes, and Clara laughing at some remark he would make about the scenery. His suitcase stood ready by the door shoes, polished, everything in order. There was no doubt in his mind that tomorrow would mark the beginning of something unforgettable. Then his phone buzzed. At first he thought it might be Clara sending a cheerful reminder about meeting at the station or a question about luggage weight. He picked it up with a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The screen lit with her name. His thumb brushed the glass as he opened the message, expecting something light-hearted. Instead, his world shifted with a single line. "Ethan, we have decided that you will not be joining us on the trip. Victor believes it is better if this remains family only." The words blurred as his eyes fought to take them in. He read them again and again, each repetition colder than the last. His hand trembled slightly, the phone heavy as stone. He set his glass down carefully, afraid it might slip and shatter, though it was not the glass that was fragile, but something deep inside his chest. Family only. He whispered the words out loud, as if speaking them might change their meaning. He was her father. What definition of family excluded? The man who had raised her, the man who had spent his life working, sacrificing, providing. He had paid for their villa, supported their lifestyle, even funded this very journey. And now he was to be cast aside, erased from the picture. The suitcase by the door seemed to mock him, standing there like a monument to hope that had turned to dust. He walked to it slowly, placed his hand on the handle, and closed it with deliberate care. Each click of the latches sounded final, like nails sealing a coffin. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. His phone buzzed again, but he could not bring himself to look. He had no energy left to read another rejection. Instead, he leaned back and closed his eyes, letting silence press in around him. When he finally moved, it was to cancel his ticket. The voice of the travel agent on the phone was polite, professional, and tinged with sympathy. Ethan thanked her and ended the call, his voice steady, though inside he felt anything but. The house grew unbearably quiet that night. The guidebooks lay scattered on the coffee table, their colorful covers now bitter reminders of plans that would never unfold. Ethan wandered from room to room like a ghost touching objects without really seeing them, his mind circling the message that had undone him. He tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw images of the train, Clara's laughter, Victor's smug smile, and the empty seat where he should have been. By morning, his disappointment had hardened into something sharper, though he did not yet recognize it as anger. He made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at his phone as if it might offer some kind of explanation. He scrolled aimlessly through social media, desperate for distraction, until he froze. There on Clara's page was a photo. The train's polished windows gleamed behind them. Victor's parents stood smiling on the platform, champagne glasses in hand. Clara and Victor were at their side, beaming, as if nothing in the world were amiss. The caption below read simply, "Beginning of the perfect family journey. Perfect family." The words burned into Ethan's mind. He enlarged the photo with trembling fingers, counting the faces one by one. Clara, Victor, his parents, 4 smiles, 4 glasses raised in a toast. He was nowhere to be found. Ethan set the phone down with such force that it rattled against the table. He stood pacing to the window, his reflection staring back at him in the glass. The man he saw looked older, wearier, and emptier than he had ever felt. Behind his reflection, his phone still glowed with their happy faces, an image of togetherness that had no room for him. His chest tightened as the realization settled in. He had not been forgotten by accident. He had been erased by design. This was not a mistake. This was a choice. He gripped the back of a chair to steady himself, anger and sorrow swirling inside him like a storm gathering strength. The house around him felt colder, the silence heavier. His eyes lingered on the framed photographs on the wall. Memories of birthdays, holidays, and graduations. Each one now seemed to carry a shadow, a hint that perhaps all along he had been more useful than loved. The day passed in a haze, every tick of the clock reminding him that they were out there living the dream he had planned. They were clinking glasses, smiling for photos, building memories without him. And worse, they had done so by spending his money, the very funds he had worked his whole life to save. By nightfall, Ethan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him like an iron chain. He turned from side to side, restless, his mind replaying the words again. Family only. Perfect family. Each phrase dug deeper until sleep became impossible. When morning light finally spilled through the curtains, it did not bring peace. It brought resolve. Ethan sat up slowly, swung his legs over the side of the bed, and planted his feet firmly on the floor. He could not let this stand. He could not allow himself to be cast aside like an unwanted guest in his own life. His heart pounded as he rose and walked to his desk. The leather journal sat waiting, its pages still blank. Ethan opened it and picked up a pen. His hand hovered for a moment, then began to move. The first words he wrote were not sketches of landscapes or notes of wonder. They were a vow to uncover the truth of why his daughter had betrayed him, a vow to reclaim the dignity he had lost, a vow to take back what had been stolen, not just money but respect. He closed the journal and placed it carefully back on the desk. His eyes drifted once more to the photographs on the wall. For the first time in years, he did not see cherished memories. He saw evidence. Evidence that his sacrifices had been taken for granted, and that the people he trusted most had chosen to discard him. And in that moment he felt the first flicker of something that had been absent for far too long. Not despair, not grief, but a determination that bordered on dangerous. The phone on his nightstand buzzed again. A new notification glowed across the screen. His fingers hesitated before picking it up, uncertain whether he wanted to know. But as his eyes scanned the message, the final veil lifted, and Ethan realized the betrayal went even deeper than he thought. The notification on Ethan's phone glowed in the dim morning light, its blue tint reflecting on his tired face. His thumb hesitated, but the pull of curiosity proved stronger than the instinct to shield himself from more pain. He unlocked the screen, his chest tightening as he scrolled. Another photo filled the display. This time it was not just Clara and Victor with the polished train at their backs. It was a group shot captured in the dining carriage. Golden light glowed over crisp white tablecloths and crystal glasses filled with red wine. In the center sat Victor's parents, their smiles stretched wide, as though they were exactly where they belonged. On either side of them sat Clara and Victor, leaning close together, their faces radiant with satisfaction. The caption beneath the image read, "Grateful for family time in the Andes. Family time." Ethan stared at those words until his vision blurred. The world seemed to tilt slightly as he set the phone down. His mind began to race, piecing together a puzzle that until now he had refused to solve. They had not simply excluded him from this trip. They had replaced him. His seat at the table, the one he had reserved months earlier, had not been left empty in mourning. It had been filled and filled with Victor's parents. The betrayal struck deeper than the first message. To be excluded was painful enough, but to be substituted, to be replaced as though he were nothing more than a spare part, cut him to the bone. He rose from the table and walked to the window, gripping the frame as he stared outside. The morning sun bathed the street in light, but all he saw was shadow. His reflection in the glass stared back at him, hollow-eyed and silent. Behind his ghostly face, the phone screen still shone with the smiling figures of Clara and Victor, laughing with the people who had taken his place. The anger that had begun as a faint ember the night before now burned hotter. His thoughts sharpened, his memories replayed with cruel clarity. Every sacrifice he had made, every check written, every hour worked late at the drafting table to give Clara a better life, now twisted into chains that bound him in place while she carried on without him. By evening, Ethan's restlessness had turned into torment. He could not sit still. The house felt like a tomb filled with relics of a family that no longer seemed to exist. He turned on the television for noise, but the images blurred into static. He wandered into the study, his eyes drawn to the photos lining the walls. There she was, Clara, at 7 years old, grinning with her 2 front teeth missing. There she was again at her graduation cap and gown, perfectly arranged, while he stood behind her, beaming with pride. Each photo now seemed to mock him, not for what they showed, but for what they concealed. At every milestone he had stood by her side, believing their bond was unbreakable. But now he saw those memories for what they were, moments of usefulness, not love. He had been the provider, the safety net, the man who could be counted on to pay when others could not. And the thought that refused to leave his mind was this: if Victor's parents were now the chosen ones, had he ever truly belonged at all? That night sleep eluded him once again. When exhaustion finally overtook him, his dreams were not peaceful. They were filled with images of long train tracks, stretching endlessly into the horizon, of dining carriages, filled with laughter he could not hear, of Clara's face turning away as he reached for her hand. By morning, the weight of his exclusion had hardened into something darker. He needed answers, and he could not wait until their return. He picked up the phone and dialed Clara's number, his hands trembling slightly as he held it to his ear. The international ringtone seemed to echo forever, each chime a reminder of the distance not only between their countries but between their hearts. Finally, her voice came through bright and cheerful. "Hi, Dad." He could hear laughter in the background, Victor's voice carrying above the bustle of the train station. "I need to understand something," Ethan said, his words clipped. "What is it, Dad?" she replied, distracted. "I saw the photos. I saw Victor's parents. They are there with you." There was silence on the line long enough for Ethan to hear the faint rumble of the train in the background. When Clara finally spoke, her voice had shifted. "Dad, we can explain." "Explain?" Ethan pressed his pulse hammering in his temples. "You told me it was family only. What am I then?" Her tone turned defensive sharp. "Look," Victor said, "you can be overwhelming." He did not want his vacation ruined. The words struck Ethan like a blow. Overwhelming. He had built this trip, dreamed it, paid for it, and now he was labeled as too much. "I planned everything," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "I bought the tickets. I mapped out every stop. And Victor's parents paid their own way," Clara cut in coldly. "They are independent. They do not expect us to take care of them constantly." Constantly. The word hung heavy between them, an accusation sharpened into a knife. "I supported you," Ethan whispered. "Every time you needed help. Every time you struggled. We never asked for guilt trips," Clara snapped. Ethan could hear Victor laughing in the background, careless and distant. Clara's voice hardened further. "Dad, Victor was right. You are too needy." Ethan's hand shook as he pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at it as though it had betrayed him too. Too needy. That was what his daughter thought of him after everything. His mind flashed through decades of memories. Carrying Clara on his shoulders, teaching her to draw, writing checks to cover her tuition, walking her down the aisle with tears in his eyes. Each memory now soured, tainted by the realization that she saw him not as father, but as burden. "I understand," he said quietly. "Good," Clara replied, her tone final. "We will talk when we get back." The line went dead. Ethan sat in silence, his breath ragged. Around him the walls of the house seemed to close in. He looked at the photographs again, but this time he could not bear their smiles. He reached out with trembling hands and turned them face down, one by one, until only blank frames looked back at him. For hours he remained there, lost in the storm of thoughts that refused to quiet. The word needy repeated in his mind, beating against his skull. He saw every sacrifice he had made not as gifts of love, but as chains that bound him in a role he had never chosen. As evening settled over the house, Ethan opened his desk drawer and pulled out old bank records. He scanned line after line, each number a reminder of how much he had given. The down payment for Clara and Victor's villa, the credit card bills, he had cleared the car payments, he had covered the countless transfers made in silence. His hand tightened on the papers until they crumpled. And then he saw it. A fresh notification from his banking app. A charge from a luxury restaurant in Cusco. The timestamp was only hours old. They were dining at his expense even now. His hands shook as he scrolled. More charges appeared, hotels, boutiques, tours, all of it on his card. His generosity had not simply been dismissed. It had been exploited. He dropped the phone onto the desk, his pulse racing. The betrayal was complete, and the truth undeniable. He had not been left behind by accident. He had been used, discarded, and replaced. Ethan stood his reflection in the darkened window, glaring back at him. This was no longer sorrow. It was clarity. They had taken everything he had offered. Now he would take back what was his. The house was silent, but inside Ethan's mind there was nothing but noise. Every thought screamed at him, every memory replayed with painful clarity. He sat hunched over his desk papers scattered across the surface, the glow of his phone still showing the latest transaction from Peru. Clara and Victor were eating lavishly, drinking fine wine, living the life he had planned and paid for while he sat alone in the dark. He pressed his hands against his temples, willing the storm of thoughts to still, but it only grew louder. For the first time he began to see his life with terrifying clarity, as though a veil had been ripped away. The photos on the walls no longer told stories of love. They told stories of transactions. He rose slowly, his knees stiff, and walked toward the framed images that lined the hallway. His hand reached out to one in particular, Clara's wedding day. She stood radiant in her gown, her arm linked through his, both smiling as they prepared to walk down the aisle. Ethan had tears in his eyes that day, tears of pride and joy. But now, as he stared at the picture, all he saw was the memory of the $30,000 he had withdrawn from his savings to pay for the ceremony. Every flower arrangement, every catered meal, every delicate piece of lace had been bought with money he had worked decades to earn. He moved on to the next frame, Clara's graduation. She was wearing her cap and gown, diploma in hand. Ethan remembered the joy in her voice when she told him she had finally paid off her student loans, but she had not paid them. He had. He had taken on the debt so she could start her life fresh while he quietly pushed his own dreams further into the distance. His eyes swept across the hallway, each photograph now transformed into evidence. The family holidays with piles of expensive gifts under the tree. The vacations he had funded, the housewarming party when Clara and Victor moved into their villa, a villa that bore only one name on the deed, his. Ethan's chest tightened as he turned away, walking back to his office. He pulled open his desk drawers and began dragging out folders, receipts, and old bank statements. He spread them across the surface like puzzle pieces. Each number, each transfer was a thread in a web he had spun around himself, binding him to people who no longer valued him. There was the $80,000 he had withdrawn from his retirement account to cover the down payment for their house. He traced the figure with his finger, remembering the sleepless nights he had endured afterward, wondering if he had doomed his own future. There were the car payments he had taken over when Victor lost his job. There were the credit card bills he had quietly paid off when Clara confessed she was drowning in debt. The pages blurred as his eyes filled with tears, but he kept reading, kept pulling out record after record, unable to stop. Each document was another knife twisting deeper. But it was not only money. Memories surfaced of choices he had made, sacrifices that had cost more than dollars. The fishing trip with his old friends he had canceled because Clara needed him to babysit. The dinner invitation from a woman in his book club that he had turned down because Clara had asked him to help her move. The vacations he had dreamed of, Italy, Greece, Japan, all postponed again and again so that he could support theirs. His fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. He realized now that what he had mistaken for love had been dependency. They had never truly invited him into their lives. They had only allowed him to orbit around them as long as he continued to fund their dreams. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his breathing ragged. On the wall across from him, his reflection stared back from the darkened window. He barely recognized the man looking back, hollow-eyed, older, harder. The softness that had once lived there, the eagerness to help, was being replaced by something else, something sharper. The word needy echoed in his head again, a cruel refrain. Needy. Too overwhelming. A burden. That was how his daughter saw him after everything. He felt the truth settle into his bones with a weight that was almost unbearable. With shaking hands, he turned the photos on his desk face down. The smiling faces were too much to look at now, their joy a reminder of how easily he had been excluded. He could not bear their hollow cheerfulness any longer. The silence in the room seemed to thicken, pressing in on him. His eyes drifted back to his laptop, still glowing faintly on the desk. He opened it slowly, his fingers hovering over the keys as he pulled up his bank account. His pulse quickened as he scrolled to the authorized users section. There, in black letters, was Clara's name. His finger trembled above the trackpad. One click, and her access would vanish. One click, and he would no longer be the silent benefactor funding their luxury. But he hesitated. For years, he had been conditioned to say yes to rescue, to provide. The idea of saying no felt almost dangerous. He closed the laptop without making the change, but the thought remained pressing at him. He knew now that support and exploitation were not the same. He had blurred the line for too long, and Clara had learned to walk across it without hesitation. As he sat in the heavy silence, his phone buzzed again. He almost ignored it, but the sound pierced through his thoughts. He picked it up, expecting another hollow notification. Instead, the words on the screen made his stomach twist. Account alert. Transaction processed. His thumb unlocked the app and the details appeared. A luxury boutique in Lima. The charge was fresh, posted only an hour earlier. He scrolled further. Hotel charges, tours, restaurants. The list grew longer and longer, each line another reminder that they were not just living without him. They were living off him. His hand shook as he set the phone down. Every photograph on the wall seemed to shift no longer memories, but evidence in a case he could no longer ignore. He had been patient, he had been generous, he had been trusting, and he had been repaid with betrayal. The silence of the house grew unbearable, broken only by the pounding of his heart. He walked to the mirror above his desk and stared at the man looking back. This was not the face of a father cherished by his family. This was the face of a man who had been taken advantage of, manipulated, and cast aside. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the grief, something new flickered in his eyes. Something dangerous. Something resolute. He sat down, slowly picked up his phone, and stared at Clara's name under authorized users once more. His finger hovered the weight of years of sacrifices pressing against him. The screen flashed a warning. Are you sure? This action cannot be undone. For the first time in years, Ethan smiled, a small, bitter smile. His finger tapped the screen. Confirm. Remove immediately. The confirmation appeared. Authorized user access revoked. He set the phone down with deliberate care, his hand steady now. In the silence that followed, he felt something he had not felt in decades. Control. But the victory was not sweet. It was laced with the taste of coming conflict. Because if Clara and Victor discovered what he had done, they would not accept it quietly. He knew them too well. Their greed would not allow it. Their entitlement would not forgive it. As he stood by the window looking out at the darkened street, he felt the first tremors of a storm gathering. They had taken everything from him. Now he had taken something back. And the battle that would follow, he realized, had only just begun. The morning after Ethan revoked Clara's access, the world outside his window looked unchanged. The sun rose lazily over the rooftops of his quiet neighborhood, birds chirped in the oak trees, and his neighbor watered her flowers as though nothing monumental had happened. But inside Ethan's house, the air felt different. Lighter, clearer. It was as if with one decisive click he had opened a window in a room that had been suffocating him for years. For the first time in days, he brewed coffee without the usual hollow weight pressing on his chest. He stirred in a spoonful of sugar and sat at the kitchen table, enjoying the sound of the mug clinking against the saucer. The taste was sharper than he remembered, not because the coffee was different, but because he was. His phone rang before he could finish the cup. The number on the screen was international, Clara. Ethan let it ring twice, steadying himself. When he answered, he did not speak first. Dad, what did you do to the card? Her voice was sharp, frantic, without a trace of greeting or concern. Ethan took a slow sip of coffee before answering. I removed your access. You can't do that, she snapped, her voice rising. I tried to pay for lunch yesterday, and the waiter had to come back 3 times. It was humiliating in front of Victor's parents. Do you have any idea what you've done? Ethan leaned back in his chair, his face calm, though his pulse quickened. I imagine it was embarrassing, he said quietly. Embarrassing. It was mortifying. You need to fix this right now. For what? Ethan asked evenly. I thought you said you didn't need me to take care of you constantly. There was a pause on the line, then Clara's voice sharpened further. That is completely different. Is it? Ethan asked, his tone quiet but laced with steel. He could hear muffled conversation in the background. Then Clara's voice returned colder than ever. If you don't fix this, there will be consequences. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. What kind of consequences? There was another pause. Then she said the words that made his blood run cold. Victor and I have been talking. When we get back, we're looking into care facilities. For you, you're getting older, Dad. You obviously can't handle your finances responsibly anymore. We'll sell the house to pay for it. You don't need all that space anyway. For a moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. He heard Victor's voice in the background, casual and cruel. Tell him it's for his own good. Clara's voice followed, dripping with finality. Victor says it's for your own good. The silence stretched between them. Ethan stared at the kitchen wall, his heart pounding in his ears. Care facilities, selling his house, removing him from the home he had lived in for 30 years. Dad, are you listening? Clara demanded. I heard every word Ethan said, his voice low. Good, then you'll fix the card. No, Ethan replied. Her voice turned shrill. What do you mean no? I mean no. Enjoy the rest of your family vacation. Dad, don't you dare. But Ethan hung up before she could finish. He set the phone face down on the table, his hand steady. He took another sip of coffee, the bitter taste grounding him in the moment. For years he had allowed himself to be pulled, manipulated, controlled by guilt and obligation. But now the truth was unshakable. Clara and Victor had crossed a line. They had not only excluded him, they had tried to erase him, to strip him of dignity, to dispose of him like an old coat no longer useful. Something in Ethan hardened. Something that had been dormant for years awakened fully. He stood and walked toward his home office, his steps purposeful. Pulling open the heavy filing cabinet, he retrieved 2 envelopes. The first held the deed to his own house, paid in full, his name alone on the title. Untouchable. Clara and Victor could not sell what was never theirs. The second envelope made him pause. His fingers brushed over the paper, the words printed clearly at the top, title deed Hillside, Villa Maple Drive. Clara and Victor's home, or at least what they thought was theirs. But the truth stared back at him in black and white. The property had never been transferred into their names. Their promises to complete the paperwork had been as hollow as their gratitude. On every official document, only one name appeared. His. Ethan sat back in his chair, holding the deed as though it were a weapon. All the years of manipulation, of sacrifice, without thanks, of being treated as a wallet instead of a father, it all came to this. They thought they had power over him. They thought they could threaten him with care facilities and stolen houses. But they had overlooked one simple fact. The villa did not belong to them, it belonged to him. The realization was like a spark in dry tinder. His grief and despair ignited into something sharper. Not just anger, not just hurt, but resolve. Ethan opened his desk drawer again, retrieving a business card he had kept for years. The edges were slightly frayed, but the name was still clear. Rafael Mendez, Realtor. Rafael had sold him the villa for Clara and Victor 2 years ago, and he was known in town as a man who could handle delicate matters with discretion. Ethan dialed the number. Rafael, it's Ethan Hale. Ethan Raphael's voice was warm, surprised. How are you, my friend? Retired life treating you well? I need to sell a property, Ethan said, his tone firm. Quickly. There was a pause on the line. The villa. Yes. Is everything all right? Raphael asked cautiously. Everything is fine, Ethan lied. I just need it sold. As soon as possible. Raphael hesitated for only a moment before shifting into professional efficiency. The market is strong. I could have buyers lined up within days. We will need photos, an inspection, some paperwork. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? Yes, Ethan said. His grip tightened on the phone. Price it to move. After ending the call, Ethan leaned back in his chair, a strange calm settling over him. For the first time in years, he was not reacting to their demands. He was planning his own move. That night, he laid out his clothes for the morning, not the soft cotton shirts of a man waiting to be told what to do, but the sturdy jeans and boots of the man he had once been, the man who built houses, drew designs, and controlled his own future. As he turned off the light and climbed into bed, Ethan stared at the ceiling. Clara and Victor were thousands of miles away, believing he was powerless, believing he would still be here waiting for them when they returned. But they had underestimated him. They thought they could erase him. But he was not done yet. And when they came back, they would discover just how dangerous it was to mistake kindness for weakness. Ethan woke before dawn, the house still cloaked in silence. For the first time in weeks, he felt a strange clarity, as if the fog that had lingered around him since Clara's first message had finally lifted. Today, he was not a man discarded by his family. Today, he was a man with a plan. He dressed in his old work clothes, sturdy jeans and boots that reminded him of the years he had spent walking construction sites. They felt right for what he was about to do. At the kitchen table, he ate a simple breakfast of toast and eggs, his mind already rehearsing each step. The villa on Maple Drive was not Clara's. It was not Victor's. It was his. And soon it would no longer be theirs, even in illusion. By mid-morning, Ethan pulled into the gravel lot outside Rafael Mendez's office. The converted Victorian house stood tall, its brickwork neat, the garden carefully maintained. Rafael greeted him at the door, warm as always, though his eyes searched Ethan's face with a quiet question. "Ethan," Rafael said, extending a hand. "You look well. Shall we talk business?" Inside papers were spread across Rafael's desk, his computer glowing with the listing database. "The market is hot," Rafael explained as Ethan handed him the villa's deed. "That property in that neighborhood should attract attention immediately. We can list at 185, maybe higher. I don't care about squeezing every dollar," Ethan said firmly. "Price it to move. I want it gone." Rafael studied him for a moment, but asked no questions. "Very well. We'll arrange photos tomorrow. I'll have my team handle staging. Do you still have the keys?" Ethan pulled them from his pocket, the metal glinting under the office light. "Yes. And one more thing," he added. "I don't want Clara or Victor to know until it's finished. Can you guarantee discretion?" Raphael nodded solemnly. "I can." When Ethan signed the listing agreement, he did so with a firm hand, each stroke of the pen steady. It felt final, like carving a line between past and future. On his way home, Ethan drove slowly through town, the familiar streets looking different now. He noticed details he had ignored before: the hopeful young families at the park, the old couples walking hand in hand, the college students laughing outside a cafe. Life was full of bonds that seemed natural bonds, that grew from love rather than obligation. And all the while, Clara and Victor had convinced him his worth was measured only in money. But that illusion was over. That afternoon, Ethan sat at his desk and began arranging the next step. Selling the villa was only half the battle. He also needed to make sure every trace of Clara and Victor's claim to it was erased. Their possessions, their furniture, their comforts, all of it had to be removed. And he could not do it alone. He searched the local listings for moving companies. The larger corporations filled the first few results, but Ethan scrolled past them, searching for something smaller, something personal. His eyes caught on one listing: Quinn and Sons Moving Family, owned for 20 years. Reliable, discreet, and efficient. Ethan dialed the number. "Quinn Moving." "This is Mara," a woman's voice answered, steady and no nonsense. "I need help with a house on Maple Drive," Ethan said. "A full move. Time sensitive. Tomorrow, if possible." Mara did not waste words. "We can do it. Full crew truck packing supplies. Do you have a storage unit ready?" "Not yet. I recommend Brady Street. Secure storage," she said. "Good people, fair price. I can put you in touch." Within minutes, Ethan was on a three-way call with Janet from Secure Storage, arranging for a 10 by 20 unit. First month paid in advance lock, included move-in tomorrow. Everything slid into place with an efficiency that felt almost unnerving. It was as though the universe itself was finally giving Ethan permission to reclaim his life. That evening, Ethan prepared for the move. He laid out his old work gloves, checked the spare key to the villa, and charged his phone. The anticipation churned inside him, a cocktail of nerves and exhilaration. For so long he had lived at the mercy of Clara's requests and Victor's demands. Now, for the first time, they were the ones who would return to find themselves at someone else's mercy. The following morning, Ethan arrived at Maple Drive 15 minutes early, as was his lifelong habit. The villa stood quiet and pristine, bathed in soft morning light. To a passerby, it looked like any other home in the neighborhood. Its white shutters freshly painted, its garden neatly trimmed. But to Ethan it looked like a monument to every sacrifice he had made, every compromise, every unspoken ache. A large truck pulled up behind him, Quinn and Sons printed in bold letters on its side. Mara stepped out, a woman in her 50s with a sturdy build and sharp eyes. Two younger men followed, already unloading dollies and packing supplies. "Mr. Hale?" Mara asked, extending a hand. "Yes, let's get started." Ethan unlocked the door, the house sighing as it opened. The air smelled faintly of Clara's perfume, the faint floral scent clinging to the furniture. For a moment Ethan faltered. Memories of holidays and birthdays in this space pressed against him. But then his eyes landed on the leather sectional sofa he had bought them last Christmas. The gaming setup Victor had insisted he needed, the closets bursting with designer clothes Ethan had indirectly funded. The hesitation vanished. "Everything goes," Ethan said, his voice steady. Mara nodded, and her crew moved with practiced efficiency. Boxes filled with books and clothes were sealed and labeled. Furniture was wrapped and carried out. Electronics were disconnected wires, coiled neatly. Ethan joined them, carrying smaller boxes, ignoring Mara's gentle protest that he did not need to help. Room by room the house emptied. In the master bedroom, Ethan found photo albums stacked on a shelf. He opened one, flipping through the glossy pages. Clara's wedding photos filled the book, Victor's family smiling in nearly every shot. Ethan appeared in only a handful, always at the edges, half cropped out as though he were an afterthought. He closed the album and handed it to one of the movers, without a word. By noon the villa echoed with emptiness. Sunlight streamed through bare windows, casting long shadows across the empty floors. Ethan walked through each room slowly, his boots clicking against the wood. It no longer felt like Clara and Victor's home. It felt like what it had always been, his property. He locked the door for the last time, pocketed the keys, and followed the truck to the storage facility. Unit 47B swallowed every box, every piece of furniture, every trace of Clara and Victor's life. Ethan paid Mara in cash, adding a generous tip. "Hope everything works out, Mr. Hale," she said, her eyes kind. "It already has," Ethan replied. Driving home, Ethan felt lighter, freer, though he knew the real storm had yet to break. Clara and Victor were still abroad, unaware of what had transpired. When they returned, they would find strangers living in what they believed was their villa. And when that moment came, Ethan would be ready. Later that evening, his phone buzzed with an email from Raphael. The subject line made his breath catch. "Property listed successfully." Attached was a link to the live listing. Photos of the villa, bright and enticing, now open to buyers. Ethan clicked the link and stared at the images. The rooms looked fresh, inviting, full of possibility, nothing like the hollow monument to sacrifice they had been only hours earlier. As the night deepened, Ethan sat in his armchair, staring at the dark window. His reflection met his gaze once more, but this time it was different. He no longer saw the hollow man who had been discarded. He saw a man who had taken back control, a man who had chosen action over despair. Yet even in his newfound calm, he knew the confrontation was inevitable. Clara and Victor would return. They would see. They would rage. And they would demand. Ethan leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and whispered to himself, "Let them come." The sale moved faster than even Raphael had promised. Within 2 days, a young couple made a cash offer. By the third, the deal was finalized. Ethan signed the last of the paperwork at the title company, his signature smooth and firm, as though his hand had been waiting for this moment for years. The deed passed from his possession to theirs, and with it a chapter of his life closed. But he knew it was only the calm before the storm. Clara and Victor were still thousands of miles away, blissfully unaware of what awaited them. Ethan could almost hear their laughter echoing across the Andes, their glasses raised on his stolen money. He did not need to imagine the fury that would come when they stepped off the plane and found their lives rearranged. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. Ethan rose early, restless, his body alert, as though anticipating a battle. He brewed coffee but barely touched it, his stomach knotted with tension. By mid-morning he drove to Maple Drive and parked across the street. He told himself it was curiosity, but in truth he wanted to be there to see their faces, to witness the moment the illusion shattered. A moving van already filled the driveway. Michael and Sarah Thompson, the young buyers, were unloading boxes with cheerful energy. Sarah knelt in the garden, planting a row of flowers with quick, practiced movements. Michael carried a baby crib through the front door, his expression focused but full of hope. They looked like a family beginning everything fresh, everything ahead of them. Ethan sat in his car watching quietly, his heart unexpectedly softened by the sight. This house, once a prison of obligations, was being reborn. It belonged to people who had not taken from him but who had invested their own future into its walls. Then he saw the taxi. It slowed at the corner, turned onto Maple Drive, and rolled to a stop in front of the villa. His breath caught as the back door opened. Clara stepped out first, her hair pulled back from travel, her clothes slightly wrinkled. She looked exhausted, but the moment her eyes swept the driveway, exhaustion vanished. Her gaze sharpened confusion, flickering into alarm. Victor followed, dragging 2 suitcases behind him. His eyes narrowed as he saw the moving van, the strangers carrying boxes, Sarah kneeling in the flower bed. His face twisted, anger rising fast. "Excuse me," Victor barked, his voice carrying across the yard. "What are you doing at our house?" Sarah froze dirt clinging to her gloves. Michael stepped onto the porch holding paperwork. His voice was calm but firm. "Your house, I think you're mistaken. We closed on this property yesterday." Clara's face drained of color. "That's impossible," she said, her voice high-pitched. "This is our home." Victor's temper flared. "Get your things out immediately. I don't know what scam you're pulling, but you need to leave." Michael unfolded the papers and held them up. "This is the deed. It's legally ours." Clara's eyes darted wildly, her face turning red. "No, no, no. Dad bought this for us." Did he now?" The voice came from across the street, calm, steady, carrying with it the weight of truth. Clara whipped her head around her eyes, locking onto Ethan as he stepped out of his car. He crossed the street slowly, deliberately, each step echoing like a drumbeat. "Dad," Clara spat, her voice sharp with fury. "What is going on here?" Ethan stopped a few feet away, his gaze steady. He held an envelope in his hand. "What's going on," he said evenly, "is that the house you believed was yours was never yours at all. The deed has always been in my name. And yesterday I sold it." Victor's face turned crimson. "You can't do that," he shouted. "This is theft. We'll sue you into the ground." Ethan's expression did not change. "With what money?" "Last I checked, your cards were declined in Peru." Clara's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at the young couple standing in the driveway, then back at her father. "You can't just sell our home," she said, her voice cracking between rage and desperation. "I can sell my property." Ethan corrected, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Which is exactly what I did." Victor stepped forward, trying to use his size as intimidation. "You think this is over? We'll fight you in court. We'll take back what's ours." Ethan held his ground. "The sale is legal. The judge will see the deed. And the deed had only one name on it. Mine." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but her voice hardened, slipping into the manipulative tone Ethan had known since her childhood. "How could you do this to your own daughter? How could you throw us into the street?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment, the memories of decades flashing before him, teaching her to ride a bike, writing the checks she needed, walking her down the aisle with pride. Then he said quietly, "How could you do what you did to your own father?" The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Michael and Sarah exchanged uneasy glances, the baby crib still in Michael's arms. Sarah whispered, "Maybe we should call the police." Ethan shook his head. "There's no need. Everything is settled. This is their home now." He turned to Michael and Sarah. Please continue your move-in. You have nothing to fear here. Then he held out the envelope to Clara. She snatched it, tearing it open with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a receipt and key for Secure Storage Unit 47B Brady Street. Her voice cracked as she read it aloud. Storage. You put our life in storage. I preserved everything carefully, Ethan said. First month's rent is paid. Victor crumpled the paper in his fist, his voice nearly shaking with rage. You're insane. You can't do this to family. Ethan's voice cut through his fury like a blade. Family doesn't exclude fathers from family vacations. Family doesn't drain a man dry and then call him needy. You made your choice. Clara's tears finally spilled, streaking her cheeks. Where are we supposed to live? What are we supposed to do? That Ethan said, his voice low, is no longer my concern. He turned, walking back toward his car. Clara's voice followed, rising into a desperate shriek. This isn't over. We'll fight you. We'll destroy you in court. Ethan paused by the driver's door, his back still to them. He spoke without turning around. Try if you must. But the truth is already written in black and white. Then he opened the door, slid inside, and started the engine. Classical music flowed softly from the speakers, serene against the chaos erupting behind him. As he pulled away, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Clara and Victor stood in the driveway, their luggage scattered around them, looking like tourists who had stepped off a plane into the wrong life. Behind them, Michael and Sarah carried boxes inside, the sound of a baby's laughter faint through the open door. Ethan drove slowly, the villa shrinking in his mirror. For the first time in decades, the chains of obligation no longer bound him. But even as a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, he knew Clara and Victor would not let this go quietly. They would come for him. They would drag him to court. And they would try one last time to break him. Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel, his gaze steady on the road ahead. Let them try. Ethan knew the summons would come. He had seen the rage in Victor's eyes, the desperation in Clara's voice, and he understood that people who had lived their entire lives entitled to another man's sacrifices would not simply vanish when their illusions crumbled. Still, when the doorbell rang 3 weeks later and a man in a dark suit handed him a thick envelope, Ethan felt a flicker of unease. Mr. Hale, the man asked. Yes, you've been served. The envelope was heavier than it looked. Ethan signed the form with a steady hand, then closed the door softly. He carried the envelope to his kitchen table and slid it open with a knife, his movements deliberate as though he were dissecting something poisonous. Inside, the words sprawled in official language: Clara and Victor versus Ethan Hale. Allegations of unlawful sale fraud and emotional damages. Ethan read each line carefully. Their claims painted him as a cruel manipulator who had taken advantage of their trust, who had sold their home without consent, who had left them destitute. Their words dripped with indignation, as though they were the victims, as though decades of sacrifice could be erased with a few paragraphs of legal invention. For a moment, the old reflex tugged at Ethan, the urge to feel guilt, to wonder if he had gone too far, to ask himself if he had been too harsh with his own daughter. But then he remembered Clara's voice, sharp as a knife. We're looking into care facilities. We'll sell your house to pay for it. He remembered Victor's sneer. Tell him it's for his own good. The guilt evaporated, replaced with cold clarity. He folded the papers, neatly placed them back in the envelope, and whispered aloud, Let's finish this. The weeks that followed were filled with meetings at his attorney's office. Mr. Collins was a calm, methodical man in his 60s, his hair silver, his glasses perched at the end of his nose. He listened carefully as Ethan laid out the history of the villa, the down payment from his retirement, the mortgage documents, the untransferred deed still in his name. He examined each record Ethan brought from his files, nodding slowly, his pen scratching across a yellow legal pad. They have no case, Collins said at last. The property was yours. You had the legal right to sell it. Their attorney will push, but the judge will dismiss this. I'll see to it. Ethan felt the tightness in his chest ease, but he did not allow himself to relax completely. He had learned too well that battles were not won until the final word was spoken. The day of the hearing arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. Ethan rose early, dressed in his best suit, and drove to the courthouse with steady hands gripping the wheel. The building loomed ahead, its stone steps slick with rain, its columns rising tall and indifferent to the human dramas playing out within. Inside, the air was hushed, punctuated by the shuffle of papers and the echo of footsteps across the polished floor. Ethan sat at the long wooden table beside Collins, his eyes fixed on the empty seats across from him. He could feel his heart beating heavily, but his face remained composed. Moments later, Clara and Victor entered. Clara's hair was perfectly styled, her makeup carefully applied as though presentation could sway truth. Victor strode beside her, his expression a mixture of arrogance and resentment. They avoided Ethan's gaze, but their presence filled the room with hostility. When the judge entered, the proceedings began quickly. Clara's lawyer rose first, his voice smooth, his words carefully chosen. He painted Ethan as controlling, manipulative, unstable. He spoke of betrayal, of emotional trauma, of a father who had weaponized his position to destroy his daughter's life. Clara dabbed her eyes with a tissue at the perfect moment, her performance rehearsed and convincing. Victor sat stiffly nodding in agreement, his jaw clenched. Ethan listened without interruption. He let their accusations wash over him like waves crashing against stone. When the lawyer finished, the judge turned to Collins. Collins rose slowly, his movements measured, his voice calm. He began not with emotion but with facts. He produced the deeds stamped and signed Ethan's name alone on the title. He laid out the mortgage records, the bank transfers, the receipts that tied every thread back to Ethan's sacrifices. Each document struck like a hammer, the weight of truth building brick by brick. The property was never theirs, Collins concluded simply. Mr. Hale had every legal right to sell it. Their claims have no basis. The judge studied the documents carefully, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched until it felt like the air itself had thickened. Then she spoke. Case dismissed. The gavel struck once sharp and final. Clara gasped. Victor's face twisted with rage. Their lawyer leaned toward them, whispering furiously, but the words were drowned in the echo of the gavel. Ethan sat still, his body rigid as the meaning sank in. Dismissed. Over. He had won. The courtroom emptied, slowly, murmurs spreading like ripples in water. Clara rose, her face red with fury. She turned to Ethan, her voice low and venomous. "You'll regret this." Victor muttered something under his breath, his fists clenched, but neither of them lingered. They left quickly, their footsteps sharp against the floor, their presence vanishing like smoke. Collins placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Clean victory," he said quietly. "They have no grounds for appeal. It's done." Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet stone and earth fresh and alive. Ethan stood at the top of the steps, looking out over the city. For the first time in months, he felt the chains fall away completely. He was no longer bound by their demands, no longer tied to their manipulations. The law had spoken and the truth had prevailed. In the weeks that followed, whispers spread through town. At the coffee shop, Ethan overheard people discussing the case. Some praised him, saying it was about time he stood up for himself. Others clucked their tongues, insisting that families should stick together no matter what. Ethan listened without reacting, sipping his coffee in silence. He had no need to explain himself to strangers. The people who mattered had already revealed their true colors. Yet even as the dust settled, the emptiness lingered. Victory was not without its cost. The bond with his daughter was broken beyond repair. The house he had once bought for her now belonged to strangers. Decades of sacrifice had ended not with gratitude but with betrayal and silence. One evening, Ethan walked through his own house, the walls lined with photographs still turned face down. He considered turning them upright again, but his hand hesitated. Instead, he walked past them out the back door into the quiet evening. The sky was painted with streaks of gold, the last light of day clinging to the horizon. In that silence, he realized that he had closed one chapter, but he had not yet opened another. The question pressed at him, "What now? What do you do when the family you lived for is gone?" The answer did not come immediately. It came days later in the form of a small sign at the pet store on Main Street. Mac's 3-year-old golden retriever. Good with people, needs a new home. Ethan stood in front of the kennel, staring into the dog's dark eyes. Max stared back, his tail thumping softly against the floor as though he already understood. And in that quiet exchange, Ethan felt something shift. The storm had passed, but life was waiting, ready to begin again. Still, as he signed the adoption papers, he could not shake the sense that his journey was only just beginning. Freedom was his at last, but the road ahead was uncharted, filled with possibilities he had long postponed. For the first time in years, Ethan felt ready to explore it. Max adjusted quickly to life with Ethan, as though he had been waiting all along for someone steady and kind. On the first night he slept, curled up at the foot of the bed, his breathing deep, and even a comforting rhythm in the silence that had once haunted the house. Ethan lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, listening to that steady breath. For the first time in months, the emptiness of the house did not feel like a punishment. It felt like the beginning of something new. Days took on a different rhythm with Max. Mornings began with walks through the neighborhood, Max tugging at the leash with excitement, stopping to sniff every patch of grass and greet every passerby, as though the world were a place of endless discovery. Afternoons were filled with errands, but even ordinary tasks felt different now, with a loyal companion riding in the passenger seat, his head out the window, ears flapping in the wind. Ethan found himself smiling more often. It was not the forced smile he had worn for years, the one that masked weariness at another demand or request. It was unguarded, natural, drawn out by the joy of a dog, who asked for nothing but presence and gave nothing but loyalty. Still, there were evenings when the house felt too large. The framed photographs, still turned face down, seemed to hum with memories. Ethan would walk past them, unwilling to lift them upright, unwilling to invite the past back into a future he was only beginning to claim. Instead, he focused on Max and the possibilities that stretched ahead. One quiet evening, Ethan sat at his desk with a cup of coffee and his old leather journal. The blank pages once reserved for sketches of Machu Picchu and South American landscapes still waited for him. He turned one open pen in hand, but instead of drawing, he wrote a single line. It is never too late to start again. He set the pen down, stared at the words for a long moment, and felt their truth settle deep inside him. The idea of travel returned slowly, no longer tied to what had been lost, but to what could still be found. Not the luxury train he had once planned with Clara and Victor, but something simpler, freer. He began researching travel trailers, reading reviews, watching videos late into the night. He visited dealerships on the edge of town, walking through rows of gleaming vehicles, stepping inside them, imagining a life on the road. The one that caught his heart was a modest silver trailer, compact yet spacious enough for him and Max. It had a small kitchen, a bed, and windows that opened wide to let in light and air. He imagined parking it by a lake, cooking breakfast, while Max chased birds along the shore, sketching mountains from the doorway as the sun set. The purchase felt like closing a circle. For years, Ethan's money had gone to fuel the lives of others. Now, for the first time in decades, he was spending it on himself, investing not in obligation but in freedom. Preparation for the journey became a project in itself. He packed carefully the same way he had once packed for South America, but with a different kind of anticipation. Camping gear, food, supplies, Max's toys, and one photo album, not of the recent past, but of Clara as a child. He could not bring himself to discard it, for within those early images there was still truth, a love that once had been untainted. The morning of departure, the air was cool and crisp. Ethan stood in the driveway, the trailer hitched to his car, Max sitting proudly in the passenger seat, as though he already understood what lay ahead. The neighbors waved as Ethan climbed behind the wheel, their smiles genuine, unburdened by gossip or judgment. He drove slowly through town, past familiar streets that suddenly seemed smaller, as if they belonged to a life he had already outgrown. When he passed Maple Drive, he slowed briefly. Michael and Sarah were outside, their children laughing in the yard. The villa, once heavy with resentment, now pulsed with new life, laughter echoing through its walls. Ethan watched for a moment, then smiled faintly and drove on. The highway stretched before him wide and open, its signs pointing towards states and landscapes he had only ever read about: Colorado, Wyoming, Montana. Places where mountains rose against the horizon and skies stretched endlessly overhead. That evening, he parked at a scenic overlook, the mountains painted in orange and purple as the sun sank. He set up a folding chair beside the trailer, Max lying at his feet, head resting on his paws, eyes watchful and content. Ethan opened his journal and sketched the scene, his hands steady, his heart lighter than it had been in years. For a long time he simply sat there watching the sky change, the silence filled, not with loneliness, but with peace. Beside him, Max shifted closer, leaning against his leg with quiet trust. In that moment, Ethan realized he had not lost everything. What he had lost was illusion. The illusion of being needed. The illusion of being valued for what he gave, rather than who he was. What remained was stronger, purer, a chance to reclaim himself. A chance to live truly, live on his own terms. And so as the stars began to prick the darkening sky, Ethan whispered aloud, "This is where I belong." This story reminds us that generosity without boundaries can become a prison, and that love built only on usefulness is not love at all. Ethan's journey shows that it is never too late to reclaim dignity, to protect what is yours, and to begin again even when betrayal cuts deep. True family, whether found in blood or in loyalty, will never cast you aside. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like the video, share it with others, and leave a comment with your thoughts. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you can join us for the next powerful story. Your support helps us keep creating stories that inspire and remind us of what truly matters in life.